As we stood at the altar about to exchange rings, my husband, Steve Turner, unexpectedly asked for a 5-minute break. Confused, I watched as he turned around, knelt down on one knee, and faced his first love. "Emily," he said gently, "I once promised you I'd propose to you in front of everyone. So, if there's an afterlife, will you marry me?" Tears filled Emily Wilson's eyes as she nodded, crying, and threw herself into his arms. Then she looked at me and said, "Riley, I couldn't marry Steve in this life, but please take good care of him for me." I could hear the guests whispering around me, the tension building. In front of me was my groom, kissing someone else. And all eyes were on me, waiting for the bride to fall apart. Instead of breaking down, I calmly walked over to Emily, smiling as I placed the bridal bouquet in her hands. "Why wait for another life?" I said. "If you can't let go of this rotten cucumber, I'll give him to you now." For 10 years, I had bent over backward, trying to win the approval of Steve's family. I thought that by marrying him and carrying his child, he would finally settle down. But this wedding wasn't about love, it only happened because of the baby inside me. And now, the man who should be made a lifelong promise to me was kissing someone else in front of everyone. Even as I dug my nails into my palms, the pain in my heart was suffocating. But suddenly, I realized I didn't want to take it anymore. Emily clutched her chest and collapsed into Steve's arms after I spoke. Without hesitation, he picked her up and rushed her to the hospital. Before leaving, he didn't forget to turn back and call me vicious and small-minded. I realized that something that could been settled in 5 minutes had turned into a huge mess, leaving everyone embarrassed. Neither my parents nor my in-laws could stop Steve, so all their anger was aimed at me instead. My mother, feeling ashamed, cried and hit me, begging me to chase after Steve. My father just sighed coldly, telling me to take care of myself as he pulled her away. My mother-in-law, who never truly accepted me, took this chance to insult me. She called me an ignorant country girl and told me that if I wanted to be part of their family, I needed to learn to swallow my pride and never embarrass my husband in public. For the first time in 10 years, I realized that no amount of effort or love could make them accept me. And at that moment, I no longer wanted to be part of the Turner family. They left with the rest of the guests, telling me to go home and think about what I had done. I stood at the hotel door, clutching the hem of my white wedding dress, watching everyone leave. Behind me, the hotel was silent and empty. In front of me, a sudden rainstorm started, matching the turmoil inside me. After the Turner family and all the guests had left, my parents' car pulled up. My mother rolled down the window, and seeing them, all my bottled-up emotions exploded. My lashes fluttered as tears streamed down my face, and I shouted, "Mom," my voice breaking. I tried to open the car door, but before I could, I heard the lock click from inside. I stared at them, stunned. With a disappointed look, my mother said, "I warned you not to go against me. Now you must listen to your in-laws, reflect on yourself, and find a way to win Steve back. You carrying their child, and Emily can't change that." "Mom, how can you say that?" I shouted, but my words were lost in the rain. Without another word, my mother rolled up the window and drove off. I bit my lip, watching the car's taillights disappear. I couldn't stop the tears from falling. The wedding was held at a resort hotel situated halfway up the mountain. Unfortunately, there was no phone signal when I needed to call a taxi. A kind waiter saw me struggling and gave me an umbrella, his eyes full of sympathy. After I thanked him, I tried to balance the umbrella in one hand while holding my heavy wedding dress with the other. I made my way down the mountain with great effort, soaked by the rain and shivering from the cold. My heels were painfully rubbed raw and bloody. When my phone finally picked up a signal, a wave of messages appeared instantly, all from Steve. Every message was filled with questions and accusations. Despite my earlier explanation that I considered Emily just like a sister, Steve still seemed to think I was targeting her. I chose to ignore him. Just then, I received a video from an unfamiliar number. In the video, Steve was holding Emily's hand tightly as he accompanied her to an examination. He kissed her fingertips and begged her with tearful eyes not to be in trouble. I couldn't help but remember when I was first diagnosed with pregnancy and had a fall in the bathroom due to low blood sugar. That time, I broke my leg and was in severe pain. Terrified, I called him for support, but he responded harshly, saying he wasn't a doctor and questioned why I was calling him. I ended up in the hospital for 2 weeks, and he never visited once. Later, I found out that on the day I fell, Emily had cut her hand while cooking. The doctor had warned her that she might have a scar, which made her cry a lot. Steve ended up taking all his frustration and heartache out on me. I paused and let out a bitter laugh at myself. I finally understood, though it was too late, and that's why I'm in such a humiliating situation now. While I was in a taxi, Steve called me. After a loud outburst, he was out of breath and told me that Emily was so frightened she had a heart attack. He demanded that I come over and apologize to her immediately. Struggling to keep the flimsy umbrella steady, I replied calmly, I am still at the hotel. As soon as I finished speaking, a flash of lightning lit up the dark sky, followed by a loud rumble of thunder. Steve's voice trembled with worry as he said, "It's raining outside. They didn't bring you back?" Then I'm his sentence was cut off when Emily suddenly started crying and said, "Is Riley upset? It's all my fault. Maybe I should have died abroad." Steve quickly began to comfort her in a gentle voice. He turned to me, visibly angry, and said, "This is your fault. Why are you feeling wronged? It's only been 5 minutes. If you had been more understanding earlier, I wouldn't have left you behind." His words struck a nerve, and I cut him off with a defiant expression, saying, "Divorce. I want to apologize to Emily. I'm not in the wrong, it's you who are. If they can't let go of each other, then why is Steve coming to provoke me? He was the one who confessed his feelings to me first and promised to be with me for the rest of his life, which is why I chose him so firmly. After 10 years together, does their love still hold more value than mine?" Overwhelmed by the thought, I hung up the phone and hastily called a taxi. While I was in the car, Steve's text message came through. "Riley, you need to own up to your mistakes. I've indulged your flaws for a decade. Do you think anyone else would want you, especially after you trapped me by getting pregnant?" I stared at the text message. I thought that after what I experienced today, there would be no more sad things, but it turned out that there were. I opened the car window and let the cold wind blow on my face. My chaotic heart gradually became clear. I asked the driver to turn the car around and go directly to the. I walked into the hospital lobby. My wedding dress was covered in mud. A nurse saw me and quickly came over, asking if I needed help. "I'm here for an abortion," I said, staying calm. Her face showed surprise for a second, but then she looked at me with sympathy. She quietly led me to the 3rd floor. As I lay on the operating table, I listened to the baby's heartbeat through the ultrasound. Even then, I decided to call Steve. When the call connected, I heard Emily crying and apologizing to me. Before I could speak, Steve grabbed the phone. His voice was cold as he said, "Riley, it's too late to feel sorry now. You've made Emily suffer enough. Unless you come and beg for her forgiveness on your knees, I will never forgive you." The words I wanted to say never left my lips. Instead, I turned to the doctor and said, "Please go ahead. The baby is very healthy. Are you sure you don't want to discuss this with the father again?" The doctor asked. "No, there's no need," I replied. When I got home, everything in the house looked the same. Nothing had changed. It was clear Steve had been spending his time with Emily. I opened Emily's social media account and saw her recent posts. She had shared a lot of new updates. People were fawning over how the once untouchable Steve was now rolling up his sleeves, making soup out of love, drawing the envy of many. I saved all the posts one by one, then turned off my phone. After quickly packing a few things, I moved into a hotel. A hot bath helped warm up my cold, tired body. I took a few days off from work to reset. Once I felt better, I returned to the office. During this time, my mother kept calling, asking if I had made up with Steve. I told her I wasn't going to be with him anymore. Her constant crying upset me, so I eventually stopped answering her calls. When I arrived at the company, I noticed the strange looks of everyone. My colleague Jesse Howard pulled me aside to my desk, and that's when I saw the headlines all over the websites. It had blown up everywhere. She grabbed my hand with a mix of surprise and envy. "I can't believe I've been sitting next to a rich woman this whole time. I always thought Emily was the real lady of the Turner family, but it turns out it's you, Riley." I gave an awkward smile and skimmed through the post. Someone with bad intentions had taken photos of the wedding and shared them online. The headlines were full of drama, calling it a bloody scandal of a wealthy family spoiling a mistress and ruining the wife. Steve's strange behavior at the wedding had caused a huge stir, even dragging the Turner family into the mess. In the past, I would rush to help Steve clean up the scandal. But now, with the divorce in my mind, I couldn't be bothered to care. It was time to leave work. For the first time, Steve was waiting for me outside the office. I tried to turn away and avoid him, but he caught up with me in just a few steps, pushing me into the car. "Are you still mad? Don't you get what's more important, a wedding or someone's life?" he said harshly. "You're not young anymore, yet you're talking about divorce and running away. Isn't that childish?" Then he changed his tone. "All right, haven't you always wanted to go to that Starry Sky restaurant in the north of the city? I'll take you there now." He pulled out a gift box from the glove compartment and threw it at me. It opened and a diamond ring rolled out. It was clearly much more expensive than the one from the wedding day. Steve gave me a look that said, "You should be happy now," and added, "Emily has a heart condition, so since she is already wearing that ring, I let her keep it. This one costs way more, so stop worrying about it." I fiddled with the diamond ring in my hand, noticing the price tag of $999,999 was still attached. It seemed like a rushed purchase from a jewelry store. In the past, when I was upset, he would cook for me, sit through movies with me to cheer me up, and spend the whole day helping me choose the perfect gift. Now, he has become just like his family, putting a price on my feelings and expecting me to accept it with a smile. I put the ring back in the glove compartment and shook my head. "It's too expensive. Let us give it to Emily instead. And I'm not making a big deal about it. Since you and Emily can't let go of each other, why don't I just step aside and let her take the title of Mrs. Turner? We can get the divorce sorted out later." Steve and I had already signed our marriage certificate before the wedding. Now, we needed to go through the process of separating and filing for divorce. I also heard that at a dinner with Emily and some friends, someone asked him why someone like Steve would choose an ordinary woman like me. He fed Emily peeled grapes and casually said, "I can't say I love her, but Riley has been with me for 10 years, and now she is pregnant with my child. It would be sad not to marry her. But the title of Mrs. Turner belongs to someone else." Chapter 3. To him, marriage feels like just a charity case and a pity. But for me, it has always been filled with love and sincerity, even when things got tough. Now, I no longer love him, and the title of Mrs. Turner means very little to me. I thought he would appreciate my attempt to help him and Emily find happiness together. Instead, he suddenly became furious, his eyes flashing with anger, and he slammed his hand hard on the steering wheel, making the car shake slightly. "Riley, do you really think it's funny to say these things? You've been trying to please my parents like a pet for all these years, bending over backward to make them happy, and you've done everything you could to get pregnant just to become Mrs. Turner. And now you have the nerve to ask for my help. Isn't that completely absurd? It's just that the wedding didn't go as planned. Can I at least try to make it up to you later? Besides, who can I blame for this situation? I had already agreed to marry you, but when I asked Emily to marry me, you insisted on acting like a shrew and making a scene. He always insisted that I got pregnant on purpose. But he clearly told me he wanted his parents to recognize me and wanted to have a child with me. Now, after Emily returned, he regretted everything and placed all the blame on me. In frustration, he pressed the horn sharply, the sound echoing in the car. If this had happened before, I would have cried and begged him to forgive me. But now, I didn't feel like arguing at all. Instead, I turned my head to look out at the scenery passing by outside the window, trying to find some peace in the moment. After a long silence, as if he was expecting me to make a humble request for peace, he finally turned to look at me and called out, "Riley." I closed my eyes and didn't say a word. The navigation system kept announcing the road conditions, its monotone voice filling the silence. When there was just 0.2 kilometers left to our destination, his phone suddenly rang. On the other end was Emily, crying and saying her heart was starting to feel uncomfortable again and asking if she was going to die. To be honest, I was tired of hearing this, even though she never seemed to tire of saying it. Since returning to Canada, she had complained about her heart on every significant holiday. Anyone who wasn't blind could see she was pretending, but sadly, Steve couldn't see through it. I decided to speak first, cutting through the tension. "Just drop me off at the intersection ahead." Steve looked at me in surprise, clearly not expecting my response. "Aren't you angry? Weren't you just insisting on coming with me?" I simply shook my head. I used to dislike him being alone with Emily, so I suggested that I go with him to take care of her. At that time, he had jumped up and down, scolding me for being petty and dirty-minded, telling me that both Emily and I should learn to be simple and kind. He pursed his lips, his phone still vibrating in his hand. The car quickly approached the intersection. I grabbed my bag and prepared to get out, but he suddenly grabbed my wrist, looking at me with a mix of emotions in his eyes. "I'll go and check on her," he said softly. "I'll come back later to take you to dinner. Don't worry, the position of Mrs. Turner will definitely be yours. Just don't be angry." "Okay, I'm not angry," I replied, trying to sound casual as I attempted to push his hand away gently. I wanted to believe his words, but it all felt so hollow. But he held my wrist tighter. "Riley, why are you so different from before? Why don't you? Not jealous anymore, right? What is there to be jealous about? The girl thinks of you as her brother. Isn't it normal for her to come to you first when she needs something?" "Now go on," I replied, forcing a smile as I broke free from his grip and got out of the car. I then took a taxi back to the hotel, enjoyed the buffet, and quickly fell asleep on the bed, feeling exhausted. In that half-asleep state, Steve called me. He explained that Emily couldn't be left alone right now and that he wouldn't be able to take me to dinner, asking me not to wait for him. I've already eaten, I replied casually. He fell silent for a moment, then gritted his teeth and asked, "Do you really have to do this?" I simply said, and hung up the phone, drifting back into a deep sleep. It wasn't until the next day that I saw the text message he sent, warning me not to play with fire or risk getting burned. You might also like. When I returned to work at the company, I immediately understood what he meant by his earlier words. All the projects I had been handling were now transferred to Emily's name. She had become our new team leader, always wearing a bright smile and asking me to take care of various tasks and chores. Steve would come to take her to lunch every day. Whenever he saw me, his eyes were icy cold, as if I were a stranger. The scandal surrounding the Turner family on the internet was escalating, gaining more attention by the day. He then asked me to accompany him to a press conference being held by the Turner family on Monday. At the press conference, I was supposed to help clarify that Emily was not a mistress at all. Instead, he wanted me to say that I had taken advantage of her time abroad to interfere in her relationship with him and had forced him to marry her because of pregnancy. He presented it so nicely, saying I would still be the envied Mrs. Turner, but I would just have to endure a little bad reputation. This way, the turmoil within the Turner family would settle and Emily wouldn't be affected. He insisted that all of this was due to my impulsiveness at the wedding, so I should accept the consequences. Naturally, I refused to go along with it and immediately blocked him. Steve's parents approached me again, warning me that it would be wise to follow their plans and not to think I could do whatever I wanted just because I was carrying a child from the Turner family. I treated them the same way I treated Steve and decided to resign from the company right then and there. My skills are quite good, and many companies have tried to recruit me before. But now, as I contacted them one by one, everyone was very evasive. I realized this was the work of the Turner family, trying to force me into agreeing to the press conference. However, I refused to compromise this time. After yet another unsuccessful application, a previous client reached out and mentioned that their newly developed overseas industrial chain needed people. The salary would be just as good as Turner's, but the work would be abroad. I asked if I should consider it. After all, I am an only child, and thinking of my parents made me hesitate. I agreed to think it over for now. When I returned to the hotel, my dad called to say that my mom was having another headache. I quickly took a taxi home. As soon as I opened the door, I found Steve waiting inside. My mother took the bag from my hand, looking surprisingly lively. I looked at her seriously and felt a wave of realization. I had been betrayed by my biological parents once again. At the dinner table, Steve sat beside me, continuously placing food on my plate. The three of them acted so cheerful, like they were the perfect family. My mother kept singing Steve's praises, saying, "Steve is such a rare and wonderful son-in-law. Not only does he come from a good family, but he is also so considerate toward Riley." Even my dad, despite being an elder, poured wine for Steve with a smile that reeked of flattery. As the conversation continued, I found myself saying how I had been too impulsive at the wedding and thanked Steve for being so forgiving. Their fawning attitude shattered all the strength I had been holding on to. I felt my eyes turning red with frustration, but I clung awkwardly to the glass of milk my mother had just handed me. Steve, still smiling, said, "It's okay, after all, we're going to be husband and wife. Even if Riley makes mistakes, I'll try to be understanding. It's just a press conference." His eyes lingered on me, filled with scorn and the confidence of someone who thought they had already won. I gripped the glass tightly and the milk spilled over, dripping down the table and pooling on the floor. Unable to contain my frustration, I looked at my parents and asked, "Am I really your biological daughter? Why have you never stood by me through any problems? Since I was a child, I've already told you I will never be with Steve again." Steve frowned, clearly puzzled as to why I was being so stubborn this time after I had compromised so many times before. My mother paused her frantic wiping of the table, and the rag soaked in milk fell onto my head. Sticky milk mixed with dirt dripped down my face. She turned to Steve, smiling apologetically, and said, "Steve, it's all Auntie's fault. She didn't raise Riley properly, and now she wants a divorce over something so trivial." Then, without hesitation, she slapped me and angrily exclaimed, "Riley, do you think you're still a 20-year-old girl? You're 30. A woman in her 30s is seen as a failure. Steve doesn't despise you for being older, but I certainly do for being so willful. You should be grateful he even puts up with you, and yet you still want a divorce." How poorly educated can you be? How long are you going to make a fuss over something so trivial from the wedding? If you can't think about yourself, at least think about the child and the parents in your belly. My face was turned to the side, and it stung painfully. Steve seemed taken aback by his mother's sudden aggression. He quickly stood up and reached out to support me, but my mother's next slap landed on his shoulder instead. With a sympathetic tone, he asked, "Are you okay? I'll take you to the hospital." Then he turned to his mother, his expression serious. "Auntie, she is my woman, and she is pregnant with a child from the Turner family. If this happens again, even if you are her mother, I want to hold back." My mother looked stunned, momentarily at a loss for words. I sneered, feeling disgusted. "Steve, why are you pretending to be a good person now? Isn't this what you wanted to see?" He seemed flustered by my gaze, and the aloof man I once knew looked genuinely lost. "Riley, you. Oh, so you really want me to take on Emily's reputation as a mistress, do you? Fine, I'll go to the press conference. Just don't come crying to me later." With that, I slammed the door of my house behind me, the sound echoing my frustration. I picked up my pace, almost breaking into a run. I flagged down a taxi and left without a second glance. Through the rearview mirror, I saw Steve standing at the gate, watching me leave for what felt like an eternity. His calls kept coming, but I couldn't bring myself to answer. I just let them ring. Then, he sent a text telling me about the press conference. He knew I had been wronged and promised to fix it once everything was over. See, he even admits I was wronged. But his words don't matter anymore. Ever since I met Emily, it became clear that I was the one who had to be sacrificed. Without thinking twice, I blocked him. When I got back to the hotel, I collapsed onto the bed, covering my eyes with my arm, trying to block everything out. But my parents wouldn't stop calling. My mom asked if I was trying to send her to an early grave. She complained about her constant headaches, saying she'd die from the pain if I didn't make up with Steve. Then came the guilt trip, how they raised me with so much love, and yet here I was, ungrateful. Their attitudes changed the moment they found out about Steve's family. I still don't understand why children are born loving their parents, but some parents don't love their children back. I replied to my mom, "Your body is your own. If you really want to hurt yourself, I won't stop you." Then I stopped replying to her messages. Afterward, I called my client and told them I was ready to work abroad. The press conference was set for Wednesday, the same day as Turner's new product launch. Business is business, and even during times like these, companies never miss a chance to make the most of the attention. I arrived at the venue wearing a black trench coat. Reporters from all the major media outlets Turner had invited were already crowding the entrance. Steve and Emily stood not far away. As I struggled to move through the crowd, Steve rushed over and pulled me into his arms. I tried to push him away, but he held me tighter. "There are so many people, be careful not to hurt the baby," he said. Blinded by the camera flashes, I stopped struggling. The reporters seemed much more controlled inside the venue. Emily smiled at me with a look of triumph. I smirked, indifferent. "Let's see if you can still laugh later." Miss Moore, after Miss Wilson left the country, you couldn't wait to drug Mr. Turner and crawl into his bed. What were you thinking back then? I also heard the baby you're carrying was made by stealing Mr. Turner's DNA through a test tube. Where did you learn that trick? Two reporters stood up, their words cutting through the room. Steve's face grew darker with each word. He snapped, "Who told you to ask these questions?" I glanced at him. The only thing in my mind was how fake he was. As the head of a major group, did he really not consider what I would face at this press conference? I ignored his confused, regretful look and turned away. He addressed the reporters again. "Since you're friends with Emily, I understand why you reacting this way." For a moment, guilt flickered in their eyes. One of them muttered, "Don't twist the truth." Steve had set this up, and now, he was playing the hero. Typical. I curled my lips again, knowing there was more to come. In response to my steady gaze, they bit their lips and fell silent. After all, if I wanted to expose them, their identities couldn't be hidden, especially with so many cameras around today. Seeing Steve by my side, Emily wobbled slightly. Steve immediately rushed to her, wrapping his arms around her. "Are you okay? Is your heart acting up again?" Once he left, I stood alone on the stage. Noticing my stare, he hesitated but tried to pull away from Emily. She clung to his arm, saying, "Brother Steve, my chest feels tight." Steve looked conflicted but stayed with her. I calmly turned away. The questions that followed were just as unpleasant. Words like mistress, homewrecker, and gold digger kept coming up. Once everyone had finished, I stood up, grabbed the microphone, and smiled as I opened my bag. With a swift motion, I pulled out hundreds of photos and waved them. In the air, I spoke slowly and clearly, "Who is the real mistress here? I believe you all can judge for yourselves." Some photos landed near Emily, and the moment she glanced at them, her fragile, innocent act shattered completely. The photos revealed Emily partying in bars abroad, mingling with different men. Everything she told us about studying overseas and managing a long-distance relationship was a complete lie. The truth was, she ran away with her first love, desperate for adventure and unwilling to accept an arranged marriage. She abandoned Steve, leaving him broken. When her plans didn't work out, she came crawling back, only to wreak havoc on my life. But why? What did I ever do to her? And the most painful part, Steve knew all along. He knew the truth and still let her back into our lives. These photos were even found on Steve's computer. But he didn't care because, in his heart, Emily was everything. He was willing to hide the truth for her, even throwing me under the bus to protect her. "Riley, you," Steve stammered as everyone turned their attention to them. Just like on the wedding day. Emily trembled slightly, leaning into Steve's arms for comfort, while Steve looked at me, shocked. Then, I pulled up another image on the screen behind me, a screenshot of Emily's private message to me the day before the wedding. In the message, she asked if I thought Steve would choose her or me. At the time, I didn't understand what she meant. Until Steve left me without hesitation, everything started to make sense. I scrolled down and showed everyone the photos I had saved of him and Emily together, taken every time he visited her. They were from every angle, full of affection and too intimate to be innocent. I walked over and threw a heart exam report at Emily. "Even your heart condition is fake. Emily, your acting is impressive." She immediately started crying, her lips trembling as she shook her head. "Riley, I don't know what you're talking about. I know you don't like me, but how can you make up such lies to frame me? Such a drama queen." I didn't waste any more words. "Whether it's true or not, someone will find out," I said calmly. "After all, the reporters here aren't easy to fool." Emily's body weakened and she fell towards Steve for support. But surprisingly, Steve didn't catch her this time. Instead, he rushed toward me. He had cheated, lied, and covered for a mistress, and now everyone saw through it. His reputation was ruined, and the product launch was a disaster. The Turner family was about to take a massive hit. I thought he was coming to confront me. But instead, Steve clutched two photos tightly in his hand. In one, he's wrapped in a bath towel, holding Emily. In the other, they were kissing with their eyes closed. A box visible in the background. His lips trembled as he grabbed my arm. "Riley, how did you get these pictures? It's not what it looks like." I sneered and pushed his hand away. "Oh, did someone force you to kiss her?" I had always assumed Steve could see Emily's posts online, but now it was clear he had no clue. Chapter 6. No wonder he felt so confident when he dismissed the wedding issue as no big deal. The crowd shifted uneasily, whispers spreading like wildfire. I nodded, relishing the chaos unfolding around us. Turning to Steve, I flashed a cruel smile and raised my voice, ensuring everyone was paying attention. As for me, I began, letting the words linger, knowing they were all the edge of their seats for what would come next. This was no longer just about their lies, it was about revealing their true selves to everyone. With a decisive move, I switched the display on the big screen to show a medical report. "I've had a miscarriage. As of today, Mr. Turner and I are no longer husband and wife." Steve stood frozen, his eyes glued to the report, shock etched on his face as he struggled to process the revelation. The reporters, who already had the photos I tossed earlier, now rushed to take pictures of the miscarriage diagnosis on the screen. In an instant, the focus of the interviews shifted entirely to Steve and Emily. While they were distracted, I slipped through the crowd and made a graceful exit. As I walked out the door, I could still hear Emily's helpless sobs. Steve was surrounded by reporters, unable to break free, but I heard him calling my name in desperation. He yelled, asking why I aborted the child and why I did this to him. I reached my car, ready to leave. At that moment, Steve's parents arrived, furious. They demanded to know what I had done. I flashed them a bright smile. "Just a small gift from me to you," I replied calmly. Then, without another word, I got into the car and drove away, leaving them all to face the mess they had created. The press conference created a whirlwind of controversy. My parents bombarded me with calls, incredulous that I could have possibly lost my mind by choosing to abort my child. They urged me to cooperate with Turner's emergency public relations team, as if managing the fallout was more important than my well-being. I was in disbelief. Over the years, as their only child, I sacrificed countless opportunities just to be by their side. I once thought that all parents loved their children unconditionally, but now I see the painful truth: some parents simply lack that love. They raised me, but I never felt the kind of selfless love I expected from them. From now on, I'll only fulfill my financial obligations to them. After that, I'll be free to explore the world, the wind, the sea, the mountains. This public relations crisis is massive. Turner's stock has fallen to its lowest point for several days in a row. I can't say if I'm happy about it, but I do feel a sense of relief. I've set my departure date for half a month from now. It's time for me to finally live for myself, to leave behind the weight of others' expectations and find my own path. I signed up for an English-speaking class, hoping it would keep me busy and help me move on. I thought that with everything going on, Steve wouldn't come to see me again. But just a week later, as I left the class, I was surprised to find him waiting at the door. He looked noticeably thinner, and I couldn't help but notice the brown scarf wrapped around his neck. It was the same one I had knitted for his birthday last year. In the past, I used to spend half my salary on gifts like watches and belts, thinking they were special. But I eventually realized that those gifts, which felt so significant to me, were often the cheapest items in his wardrobe. So last year, I saved for 3 months and dedicated time to learn how to knit, believing a handmade scarf would show him how much I cared. However, when I gave it to him, he barely glanced at it and tossed it in the corner of his closet. I wanted him to wear it to appreciate my effort, but he just frowned at my calloused hands and said, "You didn't actually knit this, did you? That seems so boring. For you, Riley." Hearing those words stung. It felt like my efforts went unnoticed, and I wondered if he truly understood how much he meant to me. I quickly pulled my hands back into my sleeves, lowering my head as I muttered, "Of course not." Noticing where I was looking, Steve lifted the scarf to show the white crane embroidery with his name on it. "Riley, doesn't it look good?" he asked, a hopeful tone in his voice. I replied coolly, "I thought you'd thrown it away long ago." With that, I turned and walked toward the hotel where I was staying. He followed me inside the narrow lobby, hesitating before speaking. "You just had a miscarriage. How can you stay here? If you need money, I can help." I cut him off, irritation bubbling up. "Have you forgotten? I aborted your child, ruined Turner's product launch, and messed things up for you and Emily. Riley, I've thought this through. It was my fault. None of this is on you. Just come back with me and apologize to my parents. I promise you'll be my only wife, and we can have another child." I almost laughed at his words. I had just ended a pregnancy, and he still thought I wanted to be his wife. "You're missing the point," I said firmly. "The truth is, I don't want you anymore. I can't go back and apologize with you," I said firmly. He gritted his teeth, his eyes turning red with emotion. He wanted to come closer and hug me, but my cold gaze stopped him in his tracks. "Riley, you've never said such hurtful things to me before. You're just angry, right? I can explain," he pleaded. As he spoke, he pulled out a stack of photos from his jacket. I ignored him, focusing instead on boiling water for tea and removing my makeup. He followed me, still talking. This kissing photo was taken by Emily. She took a big risk, and it was a mistake. There were too many people around, and I couldn't bear to see her taken advantage of. This one is from a rainy day when my clothes got soaked. In the hotel, there was a sudden thunderstorm. She got scared and jumped into my arms, so we hugged each other tightly. He kept going, showing me more photos as if they would change my mind. The water in the kettle went from boiling hot to ice cold, yet he still had more stories to tell. His voice grew softer, strained with emotion, and I could tell he was losing hope. I looked up at him and asked, "Do you really want to keep talking?" He clenched the photo tightly, pain visible in his eyes. "The marriage between our families was never what I wanted. I fell in love with you, and when Emily confessed her feelings, I turned her down. That made her angry. When I left the country, everything spiraled out of control. Riley, we owe her something from the past, but I promise I won't let you suffer any injustice from now on. You understand, right?" His words took me by surprise. I remembered the first time I met Steve back in college during a literary performance. My parents were strict about money, and as a freshman, they cut off my living expenses. Despite working every possible hour, I struggled to even eat, let alone afford the costume fees. Just when I was feeling hopeless, Steve stepped in and offered me his performance clothes, saying he didn't want my situation to affect the whole class. That was when I first started to notice him. But Emily was always by his side, so I kept my feelings to myself. I never thought he might have liked me back then. Now, a wave of mixed emotions washed over me, and all I felt was disgust. "You might also like." I curled my lips in disdain, locking eyes with him. "Do you really think I'll be swayed by what you just said? Honestly, I'm just disgusted. This is all your choice. You can try to make things right with her, but you've chosen to trample all over me." We have no relationship anymore and I will never forgive you. I pulled the divorce certificate from my bag, watching his eyes widen in disbelief. Just 3 days after the press conference, Steve's parents came to see me, calling me a ruthless woman willing to do anything for my own gain. They used their influence to end my marriage with him. He leaned against the door, frustration written all over his face. So you really want to come back, right? Yes, I replied firmly. I hadn't told anyone about my departure, but as I was about to board the plane, I spotted Emily rushing toward me. Bitch, she yelled, brandishing a sharp knife in her hand. She accused me of stealing Steve away and screamed that I had clearly pushed him to separate from her. Yet, she wondered why he still refused to accept her back. The chaos of that moment left me feeling both shocked and oddly empowered. I couldn't dodge her. Just as the moment came, I felt a familiar embrace around me. The sharp knife sank into Steve's lower abdomen and blood quickly soaked through his white shirt, turning it crimson. Emily was quickly restrained by airport security and someone in the crowd called the police. I watched in horror as Steve collapsed in front of me, yet strangely, I felt a sense of peace wash over me. The boarding announcement blared and I held my ticket tightly, but my other wrist was held in a firm grip. His face was pale as he pleaded, Riley, I know I was wrong. Please don't leave me. The pressure he put on the wound made the blood flow faster. Despite the fact that my feelings for him had faded, I didn't want him to die. I quickly removed the scarf I had knitted for him, pressing it against his wound to stop the bleeding, and calmly called for help. Stay with me, Steve. I'm really frustrated with you right now. I pried his fingers off my wrist one by one. After handing him over to the airport staff for care, I walked away without looking back. Even during my second year abroad, I still sent money to my parents every month, trying to find a balance between my new life and the past I left behind. My parents no longer scolded me for being heartless, nor did they pressure me to come home for the holidays. Instead, they often asked with hope in their voices if I would return for the new year. Meanwhile, the Turner family faced ruin. Rumors circulated that Emily's pregnancy had triggered the downfall. After Steve's violent outburst, she lost the baby and could no longer become a mother. Not only did she leak Turner's scandals online, but she also sold their core secrets to rival companies. In a tragic turn of events, both Emily and Steve jumped from the Turner building in a moment of madness, ending their lives. I found myself at the stunning Iguazu Falls with my colleagues, listening to my current boss chat about the past and the people involved. Yet, I felt nothing in my heart. As the new year approached, I replied to my parents, no reply. My colleagues urged me to take photos, and in front of the camera, I managed to show a bright smile I hadn't felt in a long time. I realized then that my new life had truly begun, free from the shadows of my past.